Senator Bernie Sanders, who I would not widely describe as anti-immigrant, nevertheless does hold what I would consider to be some anti-immigrant views, or at bare minimum, something of a skepticism, particularly around what happens to natives' wages when we allow for worker guest programs. Is there anything to that worldview?
On the economic side, if there were one myth that I could debunk, that would be the one. In the 90s and early 2000s, there were some research studies conducted by a pretty prominent economist named George Borjas, who is still at Harvard, that claimed to show that the arrival of low-skilled immigrants lowered the wages of low-skilled natives, particularly high school dropouts. Those studies were published in reputable journals, and they sort of were pretty widely accepted. But like I said at the very beginning, in the last 20 to 25 years, we've had just much better data, and those studies have been debunked. And in fact, what we now believe based on the evidence is exactly the opposite, that the arrival of even of unskilled immigrants has either no effect on the wages of natives or a small positive effect. 2 to 3% is the most recent estimate in a study done with data covering the last 25 years in the US. Now that seems counterintuitive, right? Because someone like Bernie Sanders would say, wait, how is that possible, right? There were 100 US workers, you get 100 immigrant workers, you now have 200 people competing for the same jobs. But that is incorrect, or you could even say small-minded, because the strong assumption there is that the economic pie stays exactly the same, right? That there are still only 100 jobs as there were before. But the arrival of 100 new immigrants means also that you have 100 new consumers, investors, taxpayers, et cetera, right? Those 5 things I mentioned. So the economic pie grows. When you have a bigger economy, you just need more workers. So the arrival of immigrants itself creates economic growth, which itself necessitates more workers. And then the second explanation for why that doesn't happen is that immigrants and non-immigrants, they do different jobs, particularly on the low skill side. Right? If you want an everyday example of that, go to your local restaurant and pay attention to who does the dishes versus who cooks versus who serves you, right? Versus who welcomes you. And you just see kind of this division of labor where immigrants do certain jobs, non-immigrants do others that favor their language skills. And so then they're not competing, but they're rather complementing each other and letting a business run or an industry function. So when you understand those two things, you can see why Bernie Sanders, I get it. He's coming from a place where he's worried about the American worker, but he need not be for those two reasons.
There was a German study. I have it up here if I can give the name if need be. It looked from 1984 to 2018, and it found that refugees and economic migrants, which is an important difference, that they have what they call occupational downgrading, which is working below their qualifications.
Yeah.
And it persisted a long time for wage and employment returns, and that refugees downgrade more than economic migrants. But language acquisition is critical in improving both outcomes. I wonder to what extent, I grant that this is a fairly narrow subset of what we consider immigrants, but the refugee side. Are there more points of friction on the refugee side as it relates to their participation in the economy and or societal integration?
So I think in general, let me first start really general. I think generally a pattern that is true is that the many immigrants, especially those who don't have high levels of skill, have a hard time entering the labor force, and their wages never quite catch up to the wages of a comparable non-immigrant, right? On the first generation, their kids do very well, but so the fact that many immigrants suffer a wage disadvantage is true. Refugees often, because of their force, right? They weren't planning to migrate, often do have to suffer occupational downgrading. But that's not saying that hurts a non-immigrant, right? That's just saying that they are not able to use all of the same skills that they did in their home country. Those are two different statements. What's interesting, though, is that actually, on average, refugees do quite well, in part because if they're official legal refugees, they have a lot of help when they come in, right? They get food assistance, they get housing assistance, they get work permits right away. And so refugees actually do very well. Leah Bustan and Rana have some pretty good evidence on this, that refugees actually kind of out assimilate non-refugees because of the help they get. The ones who are going to struggle the most would be undocumented or illegal immigrants, right? Because they are not here through regular channels. They don't have work permits. It's very hard for them to prove their credentials. And so they will often struggle, but that struggle relative to other immigrants and relative to natives, they're still doing better on average than they did in their home countries, right? And they're not taking away jobs from non-immigrants. And so, obviously we would want them to assimilate faster, and we would not want irregular immigration. But if the concern is that natives will be hurt, I think you can put that one to bed. If the concern is that we would want immigrants or refugees or undocumented immigrants to kind of rise faster, I think that's a valid concern. We would want that. Yeah.
What do most people not understand about illegal immigration that they need to? How should people understand what illegal immigration is, what contributes to it, and what happens once they get here? Another large question, but a good place to start, I think.
Yeah, it's a great question. Please stop me if I just get too long-winded on this one, because there's just so much to it. The U.S. has a very large illegal, undocumented, irregular population, whatever term you prefer to use, right? About a quarter of all immigrants are undocumented in this country. That's about 14 million individuals. That's a lot of people. So the fact that that's a big issue is not under dispute. It's not as big as, Trump says it's like over 20 million. It's not that big. It's about 14 million. But it's still big, right? I mean, 14 million is still a lot, right? And we would want it to be zero. When you have that much, right, not just that much in numbers, but that much as a share, the question is, what's the problem, right? And you can't say when a quarter of all you can't say it's a bunch of bad apples when a quarter of your apples are bad, so to speak, right? That's a problem with the system. And so I think the first thing I would want people to understand is that the main cause of undocumented immigration in this country is that our system not only encourages it, but strongly incentivizes it. That is, it's a problem of our own creation, right? And that might seem like, wait, why? How did we create that problem? Well, it's because our system, let me use economics terms, the legal supply of immigrants we allow is much lower than the demand for people we have, both economically and for family reunification and other reasons. Our system, our immigration system in the US right now dates to 1990. What I always like to tell my students is that our immigration system is older than the internet, right? And so they gasp and they're like, what could possibly be older than the internet? So if you think about 1990, right? It's a totally different world situation, totally different economy, totally different needs, totally different demographic profile in the US. So in 1990 was the last time we set quotas for the number and types of types of visas we would allow. And so we only give about 1 million green cards per year. Of that million, about two-thirds goes for immigrants that are reuniting with their families, and only 140,000 are green cards that are employer sponsored. That is, economically motivated migrants who are sponsored by an employer. Just think of that number for a second, Luke. 140,000 per year for a whole country, right? As big as the US. I mean, your state, I don't know where you live, but I'm sure your state could use 140,000 of them every year. Here's another, fun fact about our system. If you're a farmer in the middle of Iowa and you need year-round workers, okay, and you can't find them among the U.S. born because they don't do farm work, guess how many visas there are for permanent farm workers? The answer is 0. We do not have permanent visas for farm workers. We don't have visas for carpenters. We don't have visas for a lot of categories of skill that our country desperately needs. Why? Because we just haven't updated our system since 1990. And it's not just low skill stuff. If you're an Indian with a master's degree trying to get a green card through an EB2 category, you have to wait in line over nearly 200 years at the moment. Nearly 200 years, right? Because there's so few visas for Indians in that category. And so when our system is just so decrepit, so divorced from reality, what you get is you have legal supply is this low, the real demand is this high. How do we fill the gap? We do it through our illegal or irregular immigration system, right? Is that the right way to do it? Well, no, of course not, right? I'll be the first one to say, but we do need those people, right? We need them to work the farms. We need them to work the factories. We need them to build our houses. But we just don't have a way to give them a legal pathway simply because our system doesn't allow it. And so we're just kind of hypocritically allowing them to come in, letting them work, letting them pay taxes, but not giving them a legal pathway. And so anyway, I'll stop there. But that's the biggest thing. Understand the discrepancy between what we allow and what we need.
Hey guys, thanks for watching the video. Please consider giving this a thumbs up as well as liking it. And if you want more of my politics coverage, go to the link in the description box for my Substack. Yes, go to my Substack. We might put a QR code on the screen here as well. Tons of exclusives, interviews, chat functionality with a whole different community over there. Tons of fun stuff. Give it a look.